The hum of the projector was the only sound left in the boardroom. My presentation, the culmination of 5 years of research, still hung on the screen, a ghost of a project that was alive just moments ago. But his words had sucked all the oxygen out of the room. Take your charity project and this meaningless data somewhere else. We're officially shutting this down. A strange calm washed over me. I smiled, a small, tight curve of my lips. Fine. He had no idea I would do exactly that, and in the process, I would dismantle his entire world. The 12 scientists and executives around the polished mahogany table stared at their notes, at the ceiling, at anything but me. My hands were perfectly steady as I clicked the remote, turning the screen to black. 10 years I had poured into this company. 10 years of late nights in the lab, of chasing elusive data points, of believing we were doing something that mattered. And this was how the new director of R&D, Dr. Julian Croft, chose to make his mark. He wanted me erased. He'd get his wish, just not in the way he imagined. My name is Leilani Ramsey. Until that Wednesday afternoon at 2:15, I had never been professionally executed in front of my peers. 38 years old, a senior research scientist at Viridian Dynamics, one of Boston's most promising biotech firms. 10 years of my life, my intellect, and a passion bordering on obsession had been poured into every cell culture, every genomic sequence, every painstaking clinical trial model. That afternoon, I was presenting the data on VRD-729, a compound that represented the most promising breakthrough in Parkinson's treatment in over a decade. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't a miracle cure. It was just solid, meticulous science, showing a sustainable pathway to slowing the disease's progression with minimal side effects. The room was filled with the brightest minds at Viridian, the heads of toxicology, clinical operations, and even a few VPs who understood the monumental financial and human implications of the project. I had rehearsed this presentation for weeks. The data was irrefutable. Our preclinical models showed a 60% reduction in neurodegeneration over a 2-year simulation. Patient advocacy groups were already watching our progress with bated breath. I was in the middle of explaining the novel protein interaction pathway when Julian Croft, imported from a failed Silicon Valley biotech startup just 6 months prior, held up his hand. "Stop," he said, his voice dripping with theatrical boredom. He wasn't even looking at the data. He was swiping through his tablet, a dismissive smirk playing on his lips. "So this is your big innovation, a marginal improvement over a 5-year timeline?" The temperature in the room dropped. I kept my voice level professional. "It's a foundational breakthrough, Julian. It establishes a new, safer mechanism of action. Our research shows." "Your research is slow," he interrupted, finally looking up. His eyes had that polished, empty look of someone who confused confidence with competence. "You know what investors want to see? AI-driven drug discovery, gene therapies, things that can get us on the cover of Forbes, not buried in some obscure neurology journal." I felt my jaw tight, but I held my ground. This research is what patients need. It's what's ethical and sustainable. "Patients don't know what they need." Julian stood up, adjusting the knot of his ridiculously expensive tie. "That's why they're patients, not scientists." And apparently, he looked around the room, making sure he had his audience, "Neither are you. This is precisely the kind of incremental, backward thinking that has held this company back for years." Someone in the room drew a sharp breath. I think it was Dr. Alastair Finch, our head of toxicology, a man who had been with Viridian since its founding. "I've spent 5 years on this project," I said, my voice cutting through the silence like glass. "I've analyzed 3 terabytes of data, run over 2,000 simulations, and I've dedicated my entire career to building therapies that actually work." Julian laughed, a short, barking sound. "And in those 5 years, our competitors have patented 3 AI platforms. We're done here." That's when he delivered the final blow. "Take your charity project and this meaningless data somewhere else." That's when I smiled. That's when the part of me that had been loyal to Viridian, the part that believed in the mission, the part that mentored junior scientists and worked through holidays, died. It all crystallized into a single, burning thought. "You want me gone? Be careful what you wish for." I packed my materials with deliberate slowness, my movements precise and calm. As I walked out, I could hear Julian launching into his grand vision, a cascade of buzzwords about synergy, machine learning, and paradigm shifts that he'd probably memorized from a podcast. My phone buzzed as I reached the lab. A text from Ben, a junior lab tech I'd mentored. "That was insane. Your data was brilliant. He's a fraud." Another followed from Maria in data analysis, and another, but I wasn't reading them for comfort. I was already 3 moves ahead. Because Julian Croft had just made the biggest mistake of his career. He told me to take my work elsewhere, so I would. To understand why his dismissal cut so deep, you need to understand what Viridian Dynamics used to be. I joined when we were a small but fierce team, led by Dr. Anya Sharma, a brilliant and ethical scientist who knew the name of every person in the lab. Anya had hired me herself. I remember the interview, a 3-hour deep dive into scientific philosophy. "I don't need rock stars, Leilani," she'd said. "I need builders, people who care more about the patients than their own egos." For 10 years, that's what I was. When our early cancer drug failed in phase II trials, I led the post-mortem analysis that salvaged the core platform, leading to 2 other successful therapies. Anya promoted me twice, not for politics, but because my work spoke for itself. Under her, I had autonomy, trust, and the freedom to pursue difficult, long-term science. Then, 6 months ago, everything changed. Our parent company promoted Anya to oversee their global research portfolio. Her replacement was Julian Croft, a visionary they'd poached from a startup that had burned through $50 million in venture capital before imploding. Julian arrived like a storm front. Day 1, he declared our methods antiquated. Day 5, he restructured the entire R&D department, bringing in his own people. "We need fresh blood," he announced in an all-hands meeting. "People who aren't afraid to move fast and break things." I watched him systematically dismantle everything Anya had built: our rigorous peer review process, too slow; our focus on foundational science, not profitable enough. He brought in Mark, his former head of data, to run our analytics department. Mark's first move was to sideline our proven statistical models in favor of a proprietary, black box AI platform that no one was allowed to question. He brought in Chloe, his former head of investor relations, who immediately started packaging our most preliminary findings into glossy presentations for Wall Street, often overstating the results. One by one, the old guard, the builders, started to leave. But I stayed. I stayed for VRD 729. I believed in it. I thought if I could just show him the data, real, undeniable data, he would have to see the value. What a fool I was. Standing in my quiet home office that night, I pulled up my employment contract from a decade ago. I negotiated one crucial clause, something Anya had happily agreed to. Section 8.1, methodologies, analytical models, and theoretical frameworks developed by the employee on personal time, using personal resources, shall remain the intellectual property of the employee. Anya had laughed when I proposed it. "We're not trying to own your thoughts, Leilani." I had been meticulous. The core algorithm that analyzed protein interactions for VRD 729, the predictive model that was the very soul of the project, I had built it on my personal laptop, late at night, using open-source datasets to refine it. Not a single line of its code was written on a Viridian machine. Julian thought he was burying a dead project. But he had just revealed his greatest weakness, an arrogance so profound he couldn't imagine that the quiet scientist in the corner was smarter and more prepared than he was. He thought he'd gotten rid of my meaningless data. He had no idea he'd just let me walk out the door with the company's future, and I was about to sell it to the highest bidder. The isolation began the very next day. It was subtle at first, masked by a thin veneer of corporate professionalism. The invite for the weekly R&D Sync meeting, an event I had co-chaired for 3 years, never arrived. An oversight, I told myself, messaging Julian's new assistant. Her reply was swift and cold. "Dr. Croft is restructuring the meeting formats. You will be notified of any relevant sessions." Relevant sessions? After a decade of every session being relevant, I was now officially on the outside looking in. By the end of the week, it was clear this was a calculated strategy. The advanced protein modeling group I had founded was now being led by Mark, Julian's data guy. I saw them in the glass-walled conference room, where Mark was explaining his new, AI-driven discovery paradigm, which sounded suspiciously like a tech blog post he had read that morning. My former team members looked uneasy, glancing at me through the glass with apologetic eyes. "Leilani, you'll be focusing on data verification for now," Mark announced later, sliding a folder onto my desk without making eye contact. "Just validating some legacy experiment results." Legacy experiments. I had built the entire predictive analytics framework for this company from scratch, and now I was being told to recheck failed tests from 2012. The social chill was even more pronounced. Lunch invitations evaporated. Conversations in the break room would die down the moment I walked in. People I had mentored for years suddenly found their shoes incredibly interesting when I passed them in the hallway. Fear is a powerful contagion in a corporate setting, and everyone could smell the blood in the water. Even Ben, the bright young lab tech I'd taken under my wing, started to distance himself. He could barely look at me during the brief moments we crossed paths. Mark says I should be logging all my hours directly through his project portal now, he mumbled, fidgeting with a pipette rack. For efficiency. He didn't have to say the rest. I knew he'd been warned to stay away from me. The worst part was the gaslighting. In the few larger meetings I was still required to attend, Julian would casually drop concepts from my now-defunct VRD 729 project as if they were his own epiphanies. We need to explore more targeted protein interaction pathways, he'd declare to a room of nodding executives, the very idea he had publicly mocked just weeks before. When I tried to add a clarifying point, he would check his phone or turn to someone else, making it painfully clear that my input was no longer welcome. HR, of course, was a dead end. When I documented the pattern of professional exclusion, the head of HR listened with a practiced, sympathetic nod. Transition periods can be challenging, she said, her smile never reaching her eyes. Dr. Croft has a very different leadership style. Perhaps you could adapt your communication strategy. Code for, shut up and take it. By week 3, I was a ghost haunting my own lab. 10 years of collaboration, mentorship, and scientific victories had been erased by one man's ego. I'd arrive at 8, work in silence on my meaningless verification tasks, and leave at 5. I'd seen this playbook before. Make someone so miserable, so irrelevant that they quit. No severance package, no difficult conversations, just a quiet resignation letter. Sitting alone in the cafeteria, watching my former team listen intently to Mark, I realized Julian had already won this battle. He was erasing me. One excluded meeting, one reassigned project at a time, but a war is not won in a single battle. That night, I sat in my home office, my personal laptop open. I wasn't just angry anymore, I was methodical. The first step had been to protect my intellectual property. I created 3 encrypted backups of my proprietary algorithm, one on an external solid-state drive stored in a fireproof safe, one in a secure cloud service under a pseudonym, the third on a secondary laptop that I kept disconnected from the internet. Then I systematically purged any trace of it from my work computer, clearing cache files, running a SecureDelete utility, leaving nothing behind. If Julian ever came looking, he would find nothing. The employment contract had another interesting clause, one most people ignored. Section 12.2. Upon termination of employment, the employee is free to utilize general knowledge, skills, and experience gained during employment, including independently developed methodologies. In plain English, if I left, I could take my brain with me, and my brain contained intimate knowledge of what our partners and the scientific community actually needed. I began documenting everything. Not my IP, that was already secure. I documented Julian's patterns of behavior, the missed opportunities, the warnings from our toxicology department that his new AI-generated compounds were showing early signs of instability, warnings that Mark and Julian dismissed as statistical noise. I started using my personal email to subscribe to industry journals and join private scientific forums, rebuilding my network outside the walls of Viridian. 2 weeks into my exile, I found the smoking gun. In our shared server, I found the communications folder with the Evergreen Neuro Foundation, our largest nonprofit partner. They represented a massive source of funding and, more importantly, patient access for clinical trials. They had sent 17 emails over the past month, expressing escalating concern over the termination of the VRD 729 project. Their lead scientist was questioning the validity of Julian's new AI-first approach. I forwarded the email chain to Julian and Mark with a simple note. This aligns with the concerns I raised. Happy to discuss solutions. Julian's response came in under a minute. Mark will handle all Evergreen communications going forward. Please focus on your assigned tasks. I saved that email. Then I saved Mark's follow-up to the Foundation, where he arrogantly dismissed their concerns as a misunderstanding of disruptive innovation. Every dismissal, every ignored warning, every piece of evidence that Julian was actively driving the company off a cliff, I documented it all. Not corporate espionage. Just a scientist keeping a meticulous record of her own interactions. 3 weeks after my public execution, I made my decision. I opened LinkedIn on my personal computer and began looking at who had left Viridian in the last 6 months. The best ones, the true builders, had all landed at a handful of companies. One name leaped out: Dr. David Chen. He was our former head of early-stage research, a brilliant mind who had left 2 months after Julian arrived. He was now the chief scientific officer at Ethelred Therapeutics. Ethelred was Viridian's fiercest competitor, constantly battling us for grants, talent, and market position. They had a reputation for rigorous, patient-focused science, the exact culture Julian was destroying. I stared at David's profile. We had co-authored 3 papers together. He'd always valued my work. I remembered his last words to me in a hushed tone at his farewell party: "When you've had enough of the circus, call me." My finger hovered over the message button. Julian thought he had isolated me. In reality, he had set me free. The redesign was mine. My expertise was mine. And soon, I would take it all exactly where he told me to, somewhere else. The coffee shop was a neutral ground in Cambridge, far from the biotech hub, a place of worn wood and the rich smell of roasted beans. David Chen looked more relaxed than I had ever seen him at Viridian. The perpetual tension he used to carry in his shoulders was gone. "Leilani," he said, standing to give me a brief, warm hug. "I was wondering when I'd hear from you." "You knew I would call?" He laughed, a genuine sound. "I knew Julian. It was only a matter of time. Honestly, you lasted longer than I thought you would. You always were tougher than the rest of us." We spent the first few minutes catching up, the usual dance before the real conversation began. Then David leaned forward, his voice low. "Let me guess. He publicly trashed your work, isolated you from your team, and now you're validating decade-old data while he sinks the company with buzzwords." I just nodded. "It's his playbook," David confirmed. "He did it at his last 2 companies. Comes in, declares everything broken, pushes out anyone with institutional knowledge, brings in his loyalists, and sells a fantasy to the board. By the time they realize it's all smoke, he's already cashed out and moved on." He paused, studying my face. "But you didn't call me to complain. You have something, don't you?" I opened my personal laptop and angled the screen so only he could see. I didn't show him the raw data from VRD 729 that belonged to Viridian. I showed him my work, my intellectual property, the elegant, powerful algorithm that could predict protein interactions with stunning accuracy. I watched as his eyes, the eyes of a true scientist, lit up. "Leilani, this is." He scrolled through the models, his mind visibly racing. "This is revolutionary. The predictive power alone, it's a decade ahead of anything on the market." I closed the laptop. Julian called it meaningless data and told me to take it somewhere else. David's smile was sharp as a scalpel. "Best advice he ever gave you." His expression turned serious. "Here's the situation at Ethelred. We're good, but we need a breakthrough in neurology if we had a predictive platform like this." "You're offering me a job," I stated. "I'm offering you a department," he countered. "Head of neurological research, your own lab, your own team, a budget to hire 5 top scientists immediately, and complete autonomy." The salary he quoted was nearly double what I was making, but it wasn't about the money. "And my algorithm becomes Ethelred's new platform. We license it from you," he said firmly. "Ethelred signs a formal licensing agreement. It remains your intellectual property. We pay you to use your own genius. Full credit, all patents in your name." He slid a folder across the table. It was a preliminary offer, already drafted by their legal team. It was more than fair, it was respectful. "There's more," he said. "The Evergreen Neuro Foundation. Their president, Alina Vance, is done with Julian's antics. She's actively looking for a new research partner, if we could show her a platform like yours. You want to use my work to win the Evergreen Grant." "I want you to present your work to win the Evergreen Grant," he corrected. "Your science, your vision, with our resources behind you." The timing was critical. Alina had scheduled a final partner review in 3 months. I closed the folder. "I need to be strategic about my exit." "Take your time," David said, standing to leave. "The offer stands, and Leilani, bring anyone you want. I have a budget for good people trapped in bad situations." The universe, it seems, has a sense of timing. 2 weeks later, Julian's house of cards began to sway. His pet project, the AI Genius platform, had generated its first blockbuster, Compound for Parkinson's. Julian rushed it into a private presentation for Alina Vance and the Evergreen Scientific Board. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. That afternoon, my phone rang, an unknown number. "Leilani, this is Alina Vance." I stepped into an empty supply closet, my heart pounding. "Alina, it's good to hear from you." "I'll be direct," she said, her voice tight with fury. "We just witnessed the most intellectually dishonest presentation of my career. Dr. Croft's AI-generated compound has a fundamental structural flaw. It has a high probability of causing severe liver toxicity. One of my board members, a first-year graduate student, spotted it in 5 minutes. She paused, and I let the silence hang. I remember your work, Leilani. The rigor, the patient-first principle. Tell me, is it true he terminated your project? Yes, I said carefully. Leadership chose to pursue a different direction. Another long pause, then the question I was waiting for. Off the record, Leilani, should the Evergreen Foundation continue to invest in Viridian Dynamics? This was the moment. I didn't need to lie or sabotage. The truth was enough. I believe you should partner with the people who best reflect your foundation's values of scientific integrity and patient well-being. Interesting advice, she said, her tone shifting. And if you were to continue your own research elsewhere, would that be a conversation you'd be open to? I'm always open to conversations about advancing neurological science, I replied. Good, she said, because I have a feeling we'll be talking again very soon. After she hung up, I sent a single text to David Chen, "Give me 2 weeks." It was time. I knew Julian had his big board presentation in 10 days to secure a massive budget increase for his AI Genius platform. I would let him walk right into the trap he'd set for himself. I reached out to Ben, Maria, and a few other key scientists who had been sidelined, the institutional memory of the company. I told them what David had offered, not just jobs, but a rescue mission. The day of the board meeting, I watched Julian stride past my desk, beaming with arrogance. He won. Got his funding. At 4 p.m. sharp, my resignation email landed in his inbox. At 4:10, 5 more followed. The explosion was magnificent. What the hell is this? Julian stormed out of his office, his face purple with rage. I was already standing by my desk, a small box of personal items in my hand. My 2 weeks' notice, I said calmly. Though I'm happy to make today my last day. You can't, he sputtered, then he saw the other emails flooding his screen. He saw the exodus. Understood. You poached my team, he roared just as the elevator doors opened. I turned, a real smile finally reaching my eyes. Actually, Julian, I said, my voice clear and steady. I'm just taking my charity project somewhere else, exactly like you told me to. The news of the Evergreen Foundation terminating their partnership with Viridian and signing an exclusive $50 million grant with Ethelred Therapeutics broke on a Thursday. Viridian's stock plunged 30% overnight. The emergency board meeting was, I was told, brutal. My old boss, Anya Sharma, called me that evening. Leilani, she said, her voice weary, I just came from the ugliest meeting of my life. Julian tried to blame you, said you stole proprietary information. Did he have any proof? I asked. Anya laughed, a tired, humorless sound. He had nothing but buzzwords. The board saw him for what he was, a con man who just cost them their most prestigious partner. What happened to him? Pursuing other opportunities effective immediately, she said, the corporate euphemism for being fired in disgrace. That's why I'm calling, she continued. The board wants to clean house. They want to rebuild around real science. They want you back, Leilani. Name your price. I looked around my new office at Ethelred. Through the glass wall, I could see my new lab where Ben and Maria were laughing, collaborating, doing the work they loved. Thank you, Anya, but no, I said softly. Viridian had a choice between substance and style. They made their choice. My future is here now. After we hung up, I walked into the lab. On the main screen was a new molecular model, generated by my algorithm, refined by my team. It was elegant, stable, and full of promise. It was a breakthrough. He had told me to take my stupid opinion elsewhere, so I did. I took it to his biggest competitor. I took the team he marginalized. I took the partner he insulted. I took everything he dismissed as worthless and built a future on it. The best revenge isn't watching someone else's world burn. It's building your own, better one from the ashes. And for the first time in a long time, I felt healed.